The worst defense in the NBA in the month of January right now belongs to the Indiana Pacers, who split a pair of weird games this weekend with the Mavericks and Thunder. Plus, Isaiah Jackson did not play in an entire game. Lots to get to and lots of weird stuff going on for this Pacers team on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News, and today we have a fun special guest on, someone who I've probably talked about the Pacers for more time in my life. 5 years now, probably, talking about the Pacers, talking about a weird Pacers weekend, splitting with two not-so-great teams. The Mavs are pretty good. And the Pacers' awful defense of late. And then we're going to talk about something that happened Saturday where Isaiah Jackson did not play and Terry Taylor did play, the rotation, what Rick Carlisle's up to. And joining me to do that, you might have read him at 8.9 seconds. You might have read him at the Fieldhouse. You might have heard him on this show a few times before, Mr. Will Furr. Will, how's it going, man?
Good. How you doing, Tony?
I am good. I am ready for the trade deadline to be done, so I stop having to consider that as a topic every single day. For those of you looking for trade talk, Wednesday is the next time I'll be doing that with some creative things the Pacers can do at the trade deadline. But today, we're talking about the Pacers defense. They gave up a franchise record 158 points on last Wednesday. Everybody knows about that. That Hornets game was embarrassing. They just gave up 132 to the Dallas Mavericks over the weekend as well. And another pathetic defensive performance. Luka Doncic had a full court basket with no resistance. He dribbled 75 feet. No one stepped in front of him the entire time. We'll talk more about that game and the Thunder game in the second segment. But what really alarmed me and what made me want to jump on the talking about the Pacers defense in the opening segment was I looked up the Pacers defensive rating in the month of January. And it is last. It is tied with the Houston Rockets at 118.3 points per 100 possessions at last in the NBA. Will, what is going on with this Pacers defense right now?
Well, we've been missing one key player for a little bit.
That is true. Talked about that last Wednesday. They needed him against Charlotte so bad. But I don't want to pin everything on that. They've been better than worse without him before.
Yeah, definitely. The lineup's been in flux, but it doesn't. The effort level, I know that's always an easy thing to blame it on, but it's really hard to give up 158 points as a professional team, I imagine.
It certainly is. There's a reason it hasn't happened since the 80s. But it's just been stunning. And most of the season, what's been jarring to me is this similar team was. I mean, Bjorker and Ball was weird, but they at least sometimes kept guys in front and had some competent defensive stretches last year. They have whole games this season where they can't keep anyone in front of them. And I'm receptive to that. Luka's going to kill you every so often. But then it's wait, Dorian Finney-Smith just had an unencumbered drive to the basket. Or oh my gosh, every possession someone is wide open, and they're wide open because there was a breakdown on the perimeter. Someone drove, and the cake is right there. The Thunder got a bunch of open threes, and their offense is the worst in the league, and they drive all the time, sure, but they should not be getting as little resistance as they have. I just have been so befuddled by, and I get that you're right, there's been a lot of lineup flux and Turner's been out, but even a lot of these guys, maybe that's a stretch, a couple of these guys were on the 6th rated defense 2 years ago, and they just look like a totally different team right now.
Yeah, I see the Pacers running out 4 guys that are 6'6" to 6'8", with Sabonis, and I'm this should be a good defensive lineup. You've got LeVert, Duarte, Torrey Craig, and Justin Holiday out there. That should be competent at worst.
Yeah, they can switch a lot, right? In theory, that's what you'd think. I mean,
yeah.
Like-sized guys can switch. That's where McMillan lacked. McMillan never switched. And the other thing with Turner, this is just raw numbers. This is never the end-all, be-all. These are the games, the point totals the Pacers have given up in games since Turner's injury. So he played against the Suns on January 14th, and then they played the Clippers on the next Monday. 139, 104, 117, 113, 117, 158, 110, 132. Yikes. That's going to be a yikes for me. So I want to bring up a couple personnel things that I want you to tell me how much you think this is actually contributing to the Pacers' defensive demise. Since December 1st, that is an important date. That is when TJ McConnell got hurt. So since TJ McConnell's injury, Pacers defense ranks 29th at 116.6 in the NBA. Behind the Kings, behind the Blazers, barely ahead of, well, significantly ahead of the Rockets, who have the worst defense by a mile. Since December 16th, that is the day Malcolm Brogdon started to miss games. He's played 4 games in the interim since this day, but still. Pacers also 29th in the league in defensive rating since then, 117.3, so even worse than the span without McConnell. So they were playing at least somewhat better defense before Brogdon got hurt. 117.3. We already talked about how they're last this month, and some of that's with Turner out. How much do you think, though, without McConnell and Brogdon, who are at least not great, but decent point of attack defenders, is that a big contributor to you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. When you replace, TJ McConnell, who I think is a great point of attack defender, and Brogdon, who's maybe a little slow, but he's long and very, very smart. And you start replacing them with Kiefer Sykes and Dwayne Washington Jr. and Karis LeVert when he feels like it. There's a hole at the point guard position, and point guards are doing whatever they want.
Duarte missed a stretch in there too. I wish I looked up his because he's actually been pretty nosy on the ball at times this year, but they didn't do like horrible when he was out. But in general, I've been befuddled at how just no resistance they provide to anyone. And yes, I agree that they're missing their 2 point of attack guys and things like that. But like Lance is nosy on the ball, and Kiefer Sykes has size limitations, but at least he like gives effort on the defensive end of the floor. LeVert's a big problem here, but like Duarte is an okay defender. Like they have, in theory, plus the switchability of their wings, in theory, the personnel to me screams like, yeah, this should be not good, but not 29th either. So even with these guys out, I look at these numbers and I just, how are they going to win if they can't contain anyone on the perimeter? They're not scoring that well recently. Sabonis is the only reason they were able to scrape by a tank-tastic Oklahoma City team on Friday. I mean,
right.
They have got to clean up their defense if they want to win some games.
That TJ McConnell date was interesting. Do you know the last time the Pacers held an opponent to below 100 points?
I do not. What is it?
It has been 2.5 months.
Wow.
It was November 17th and November 15th, and they lost both of those games.
They lost to the Pistons. They lost to the Pistons. Ironically, they just cannot put it all together. Yeah, that is jarring. That is unbelievable. I mean, they can't stop anybody right now. It's crazy. They were close against Boston. That one went to OT and went to 101. But in general, yeah, they can't. Wow, they cannot defend anybody. Even bad offensive teams are just putting up. Detroit putting up 113 in December. That was the day after the Brogdon injury. That one stands out as a big scoring outburst to me. I mean, they just, some crappy teams just hang numbers on them. It's really pathetic.
Yeah, I expected a baseline level of competence with Rick Carlisle. Expected the defense to come in and be a professional defense, even with maybe some undermanned personnel. And we have seen as you said, the worst defense in the NBA in 2022.
So I have a few culprits I'd like to point out, and you already mentioned one. Karis LeVert, like he said after a game a couple weeks ago, like, yeah, I had some terrible closeouts in this game. And one game they played the Wizards, he was guarding Bradley Beal, and he defended pretty well. And he was like, yeah, I was excited to defend Beal and slow him down. So he's pretty cognizant of the effort he puts in on defense in the matchup he has, which is fascinating to me because he is an awful point of attack defender. I just completely miserable this season. There are some games where he's just a body on the floor. He's not stopping anybody. His rotations are really slow. Torrey Craig can defend on the ball pretty well. There's a reason they continue to start him despite his poor offense. That's because he's strong and bulky, but his team defense has been pretty weak this year. Justin Holiday's taken a step back for sure. Jeremy Lamb's in their rotation every day. So even if, and Carlisle, like all preseason, they worked on defense for their first 4 practices, and with Turner, they're at least a capable defensive team and they have all these guys, but it's laughable to think that they worked on defense this much because their personnel just is, especially Dwayne Washington's in the rotation. He's a rookie, so I don't expect him to be good at defense, but nothing's there for him. I mean, just the guys you even expect to be good at defense, beyond the guys who stink like Lamb and LeVert, haven't been that good either. So personnel, I think, is all of it. Schematically, even if it's a little more simple this year and some of the stuff they do strategically makes sense. Like there's very rarely like I'm like, why are they in zone right now? Like with last year, like why did they switch that? That was so dumb. It's just that they just have crappy defenders who get beat all the time. That's what I think it is, but that seems like a lazy way to pin it down.
No, I think you're exactly right. LeVert can be a good defender. You know how much I love Karis LeVert. He can be a great defender when he's locked in, but he seems to really ebb and flow. And, you know, like you said, Holiday hasn't been as good this year. Torrey Craig is great on ball, like you said, but he gets caught sleeping. He gets back cut. He seems to be out of position a lot. And then defense has never been Domantas Sabonis' number one priority or number one strength. He fights hard and he is bulky and strong, but he doesn't defend the rim.
With Sabonis too, the thing I'll say is like I've always said on the show I think he's good at defending centers, and this is where you can get a little on the Pacers coaching staff and their tactics is sometimes they switch with Sabonis. And with Turner, they can get away with it. But Sabonis is not good enough at recovering or defending out in space for that to make sense. So that is somewhere where you don't necessarily want to switch with him as much. They don't do it too much, but they do it enough that it's maybe something they should tone down a little bit, especially as he's playing 43 minutes against an overtime win against OKC when you're 18-33. Maybe try to tone down how much strain you're putting on your former two-time All-Star, especially in a pivotal little 10-day stretch coming up with trades on the horizon. I don't know who's going to be included for the team, but you'd like to be able to display everyone who is potentially on the block. This team just has to defend better, right? Like there's not one player on the team that I've been like, yeah, they have met the expectation that I think this team set for them defensively. And it's too late for me to say like they need to defend better to save their season. Like they're closer to Detroit in 14 right now than the play-in, right? Like there is no saving the season. It's done, right? But they do need to at least improve and establish some sort of baseline for next year's Pacers team to say, okay, this is how we're going to defend when we're actually a good team. That's what I think.
Yeah, they are obviously paying Rick Carlisle a lot of money. They need him to figure this out. And like you said, it's not all on the coaching staff, but he's got to work with what he's got. And right now they're just god-awful. I don't know if the answer is more zone. I don't know if the answer is just Malcolm Brogdon coming back. Who knows if we're even going to see him again this season.
Yeah, him returning would be nice. I mean, I think he gets kind of underrated as a defender on this team. I think the on-offs treat him pretty well. Same with Turner. So if they trade Turner, I think we're going to see a pretty miserable Pacers defense the rest of the season. That will kind of force the coaching staff to get creative, which maybe will be a good thing in the long term.
Yeah, maybe playing some of the other talented shot blocking centers would be awesome too. We'll see if the coaching staff comes around to that. They have a little bit lately.
We will definitely talk about that at the end of the show because that Thunder game, no Isaiah Jackson that game, that was one of the more bizarre Pacers rotation decisions I've seen all season. Let's take a little break and talk about this weekend of games because the Pacers did in fact win. It wasn't all doom and gloom for them this weekend. They went to overtime with a team intentionally trying to lose, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander got hurt in that game. But besides those facts, they did in fact win that basketball game. But before we do that, let's talk about the good folks over at Built Bar who are making the best tasting protein bars ever. And if you are like me in this new year, you're working on getting fit Built Bar into your plan. They're 100% covered in chocolate protein bars, but they're really healthy and they taste like a candy bar. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs with 17 grams of protein. You compare that to a candy bar, which has 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, dozens of net carbs. You're getting a lot more out of your Built Bar, but they are just as tasty. I can attest to it. I love the peanut butter brownie one. They have these puffs ones with some marshmallow base in them that are really good. You got to try them. You can use them as a snack, use them as a meal supplement at work like I do, whatever. You got to try them. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. That promo code, again, LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen every single day. For your second listen, Locked On Clippers might be the way to go. That's who the Pacers play tonight. Maybe Locked On Mavs, who broke down Rick Carlisle's return to Dallas this weekend. We'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to ask you a very loaded question, Will. Do you get any butterflies and warm and fuzzies from the Pacers beating the Oklahoma City Thunder in overtime after the Thunder missed a point-blank layup to win the game with 20 seconds left?
I did not, despite the fact that it feels like the Pacers' first win in a month.
it didn't feel like a win. I'm not gonna lie. They sucked. I mean, they did not play well in that game. They kind of shot the ball well from 2-point range, but 19 turnovers, 20 fouls against OKC. They needed overtime to beat the Thunder. It took a miracle, a couple shots to tie it up into overtime. The Thunder had 2 completely wide open layups to take the lead late. Somehow they both roll off, and Justin Holiday clinches it at the free throw line. And they hit a 3 that tied the game technically, but the Pacers fouled up 3. It was a mess. It was the worst win I think I've ever seen. Karis LeVert was 3 for 19. He was terrible. Duarte was 2 for 9. He really struggled. Torrey Craig really struggled. He was a minus 18 in an overtime win. I mean, it's weird how much they needed Sabonis to return this weekend to even be kind of capable. And against a Thunder team that sucks at defending the post, that wasn't surprising. But it's kind of jarring that we're at this point in the season and it's still just the Pacers' biggest key to winning in so many games is just if Sabonis is awesome, they might win. If they play through him, they might win. And if they don't, especially with the guys they have out, they have very little chance.
Yeah, beating overtime to barely beat a team whose front line was Beasley and Mike Muscala is not a great sign for the prospects of your team. Needing to play Sabonis 43 minutes against that player, not exciting.
No, it is not. So let's give Sabonis some credit to his credit. They played him 43 minutes, and he did very well. 24, 18, and 10. I think that was his 5th triple-double of the season, maybe 6th. He's quite a lot. It was his first game back from injury. If you recall, he returned from injury against OKC last year when they scored like 150 whatever on the Thunder in OKC. So that's just the key to the Pacers looking like a capable basketball team is just bring Sabonis back from injuries against the Thunder every time they play him. So he was really good. And Justin Holiday hit 4 threes and had 22 points. He met the expectation of his role, which for him has been few and far between this season. And Jeremy Lamb surprisingly had a capable 14-point game, and that's kind of it. O'Shea Brissett played some nice defense. That's all you need to beat the Thunder is 3.5 capable rotation players. I have no confidence that win means anything for the Pacers. In fact, given where the loss column stands for the Tankathon rankings, that might not have been the greatest win for the Pacers. So they will be happy to get the win as a team. They were stoked to. They came back from down 18. Like, if this was like the 30th game of the season and they were whatever they were right then, 13 and 17, they'd be doing backflips if they got this win. It was a sick comeback. They got a superstar performance from their best player, but it was not an awe-inspiring win, which led into Rick Carlisle's return to Dallas. Rick Carlisle, very emotional on the sidelines, tears streaming down his face. They were on a back-to-back on the road, traveling between. Like, I don't expect them to win any games anyway, but they looked awful against the Mavs. The defense was so bad. Sabonis, again, had 21, 15, and 8, and was minus 18. Like, the starting 5 was completely atrocious. Justin Holiday reverted to the inconsistent guy. He was 1 of 7. Torrey Craig missed every shot he took. LeVert was 4 for 10 again. I mean, nothing was inspiring about the Pacers this weekend. And as we head into the trade deadline, games like this, kind of to me, their position was already cemented. But if they can barely beat the Thunder and they can't hang it all with the 5th seed in the West, I mean, their direction had already been determined. But I think this weekend kind of cemented it for me. I don't know about you, Will.
Yeah, when Dwayne Washington is your leading scorer, you're probably not winning that game. Not to say anything bad, he's actually looked really awesome lately. I'm excited about him. Was not ready for Dwayne Washington Jr. to be an exciting prospect, but here we are. But even in the second night of a back-to-back, they're giving up 132 points. That's unacceptable.
No one played good defense. I mean, we just talked about this, so I don't want to rehash the entire discussion, but like so many just unencumbered drives, like 23 points for Reggie Bullock, easily his season high. He was wide open all the time from 3. He hit 6 threes, and they kept talking about it on the Mavs broadcast. They're like, look how great the Mavs offense, like they're setting up all these open threes for Reggie Bullock. Finally, he's this guy they wanted and he signed. And, I get why the Mavs would be psyched that their big signing from the summer is having this awesome game. And like, that's great. There was just no resistance from the Pacers. Luka had the easiest 12 assists of his life. 8 assists for Jalen Brunson, same deal. He just dribbled twice into the lane and 3 people were all of a sudden open. Marquise Chris had 3 assists. All he had to do was turn around when he caught the ball in the post. I mean, they played no defense at all. Terry Taylor played an entire quarter of the game. Dwayne was one of the only bright spots, and O'Shea Brissett was a bright spot this weekend. I have a full segment dedicated to O'Shea Brissett coming tomorrow. I mean, yeah, you're right though. Any game, Dwayne Washington is your leading scorer. And by the way, look, I'm all about balance for this Pacers team. I've talked about that being one of their key strengths on offense. Dwayne Washington shot 6 times more than anybody else. So, yeah, he's your leading scorer. You're also spoon-feeding him looks. It was just like a perfect summary of this team this weekend, that they barely beat the Thunder in overtime, and then they come out against the Mavs, and they have to have Dwayne Washington shoot 17 times to have a competent offense and have Sabonis have 21, 15, and 8 to be minus 18 with the starting five. They just look completely helpless. And they beat the Mavs earlier this season. Like, it kind of speaks to how much of a free fall there has been since early December, that a team they beat handily earlier this year, they can't even kind of compete with.
They don't look like they have any kind of game plan, any focus. They look like they're coming out and, they're all playing basketball sort of, and that's about all they have going for them.
It's almost like they all got bad news before the game started. It's kind of what it felt like they played. And on these emotional games, I get that it can be hard and things like that. Like, I'm not going to kill them for getting smoked by the Mavs on a back-to-back on the road. They played poorly, but it is what it is. But the whole weekend in general was strange. And you know who was okay against the Mavs that we should talk about now? That is none other than rookie Isaiah Jackson. And they played Terry Taylor for a full quarter against the Mavs as well. He fits into this equation as well. But against the Mavs, Jackson was 5 for 8. He had 6 rebounds. He had 3 blocks. He had a steal. He had 12 points. And the night before against the Thunder, he certainly had a great stat line. Oh, wait, he didn't play. He did not play against OKC. Befuddling decision. That's the last thing I want to talk about here. And this is kind of a segment I've done a lot on this show. But it needs to be rehashed for a Pacers team that is currently 18-33. So let's pivot really quick and talk about Isaiah Jackson's minutes.
Yeah, Isaiah Jackson should not get another DNP CD this year.
You're on it.
I don't care who's healthy. He needs to play.
Yeah, he has been incredibly promising when he does play. And then they play the Thunder on Friday. And it's some of it's that he didn't play, right? Like, he should be playing every game. I agree with you. We'll get serious in that in a second. But here are other things that happened in a game he did not play. Goga, the backup big that game, played 2 minutes, and then got hurt with a sore foot, right? So now there's a hole again at backup center. And Isaiah filled it against Dallas. They realized how dumb it was he didn't play. Terry Taylor, a two-way guy. And by the way, Terry Taylor's kind of good. That's a stretch. Terry Taylor is like a good two-way contract level player. Like, he's been in the rotation for 3 games now and has gotten multiple offensive rebounds in all of them and can just grab any miss off the rim and is finishing every shot he takes. He's shooting like 70%. Like, he's fine to play. I'm okay with experimenting with young guys at this point in the season, but not instead of Isaiah Jackson. There is no way in a game that Goga gets hurt against OKC when you're 18-31 at the time, or 17-31 at the time, that you're not playing Isaiah Jackson at all. That made no sense. I asked about it after the game, and it was kind of like a matchup thing. The Thunder are a smaller team. You talked about their tinier front court earlier, and like, I guess I get it, but don't you want him to play against uncomfortable lineups too? Like, isn't that part of his growth? Isaiah should, I think, like you said, be playing every single game. I mean, you're 18-31. He looks good and promising. There's what is the pro of him not playing at this point? There isn't one, right? There are none. I mean, Terry Taylor playing is cool and good, but Goga's not playing. There is none. I mean, there is not a single benefit they have gotten from this game by not playing. And they played O'Shea Brissett at center a little bit. I suppose they can squint and go, yeah, we learned a little bit from that. And again, Sabonis had a wonderful game, but they're past the point with Sabonis too, unless they deal Sabonis. But they're kind of past the point of like featuring him as a sale point, as like, if this is a thing they can do to say, yeah, great, we boosted his value and got a big trade. Like, Turner's been out. It seems kind of obvious what the thinking is there. If they deal Sabonis, maybe we'll look back at this game a little differently. But either way, Isaiah should be playing every game. Like, the one stat that a lot of college scout level people kind of talk about is like a key indicator of a good defender. They call it stocks. They call it steals plus blocks, right? And so in the games Isaiah has been in the rotation for, which I guess starts against the Lakers, but really starts the game after the Lakers. But still, one stock against the Lakers, 3 against Golden State, 2 against Phoenix, 2 against New Orleans, 2 against Charlotte, and then 4 against Dallas. And they only played over 20 minutes in one of those games. Like, his defensive impact is so impressive that You have to play him. You have to play him every game. Like especially for a crappy defensive team, they just need to find a way to get him on the court and get him in. Even if it means playing him with another center, even if it means playing him with a guy like Terry Taylor, who he might not fit with well. There is just absolutely no reason to not get him a couple minutes every single game.
Can I throw a comp out there for you?
Sure, I love comps.
Not the same play style, but he reminds me a ton of Quickly. Just the type of energy and force and passion he brings in the way he's all over the place. I saw the Knicks in person earlier this year out in New York, and Quickly really killed the Pacers. And I kept thinking they need something like that. Isaiah Jackson, to me, looks like that jolt of energy and that kind of springiness that the Pacers roster is missing.
I love Emmanuel Quickly, so I'm I'm all about that comp in general. They would be fun together if that the trade partners that could be the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers link up this season. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And guys who when they move faster than other players, it's easy for them to stand out in that comp kind of way too. It's like, oh, if they could just find a way to keep that very coordinated and together, they would be clearly good. And Isaiah has at times looked like he just turned 20 on the 10th of this month, right? Like the way he's able to run and contort his body and play good defense and finish these lobs, right? And that's something Rick Carlisle talked about after the Mavs game. Like, we've got to find a way to throw better lobs. That's something the Pacers don't have, and they haven't had since never a long time since they've had a guy who plays kind of like that. Like Gerald Green could jump like that, but didn't have like the running style and the energy providing game impact. And Fred Jones could kind of jump like that, but definitely did not have the energy game impact. Like this is new territory for the Pacers to have a guy like this. And this is new coaches since they've had Fred Jones and Gerald Green, but I think they've got to find ways to get him out there and use him and try to find ways to get guys to fit with him, not only because his skill set's unique, but because he's for sure a future of this Pacers team.
Yeah, he's the first vertical spacer the Pacers have had in, I can't remember, like a pick and roll vertical spacer that they've ever had like him. Sabonis and Turner both a little more ground bound, and vertical spacing is a big deal. And, 3-point spacing is a different thing, but Isaiah Jackson can really help the offense just by being a threat if we have someone who can throw those passes.
Well, and the thing about vertical spacing is, like, think about the games that Miles Turner has felt like the worst defender. It's always against those vertical spacers, right? Like when the Lakers have Dwight out there just able to jump up really high and dunk, all of a sudden the guy who's driving at Miles, all of a sudden he's in no man's land because there's a pass behind him that isn't there against guys who can't jump like that. And so there's games against the Lakers where Miles looks terrible because his pick and roll defense just gets neutered by a couple lobs, and Embiid always kills him for different reasons. But in general, the guys that destroy Miles in ways that are unconventional are those lob threats. Like Isaiah gives them that. You can break down really good rim protectors with him at center because he can do that if you figure out how to throw the lob, how to time all that stuff. And Isaiah's got to become a better screener. That's part of the equation as well. He's a pretty bad screener right now, but it is certainly a weapon they've never had. His defense is fantastic. And I want to I don't want to close this with this, but I want to also give props to Terry Taylor, because that dude can rebound a ball. And I don't think he should he should be playing over Terry Taylor, who played in both games this weekend, because Terry can kind of play. His Madden stats are like hilarious. They look fake. Like finding a role for him, especially when you're 18 and 33 now, is fine. Like if you can find him 5 minutes a game as a rookie, that's fine. But at the expense of Isaiah Jackson, it's silly. And so I'm pro Terry Taylor. I think there will be a point in the season where he's worth a segment talking about his skills and how they can fit him in post-trade deadline, especially when their roster's a little more clear. But, I mean, Isaiah's got to be playing over him. I think you got to consider, like every wing guy, I get why they're playing Torrey Craig and Justin Holiday every game. And if they stay on the team past the deadline, they'll keep playing. But they're honestly at the point where playing Isaiah at the 4 over those guys is appealing to me from a team building perspective. Like, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, you got to see what you have. They traded Aaron Holiday. They spent a first-round pick. There's no reason to let him ride the bench behind a two-way guy, even if Terry Taylor's been a fun story.
Hey, I love my stories. Don't ruin my stories. Yeah, and there's something else that I didn't even realize. I was looking at my notes for this segment. Before the season, I was talking to KP. This was like at the press conference where we met Chris and Isaiah. And KP was like, I know there's going to be a lot of talk about like, oh, we drafted another center, blah, blah, blah. But like, I think Isaiah could play the 4. And I also, when I watched him at Kentucky, like he can defend the perimeter well enough that like, it's not going to be his primary position, but like, yeah, he can play the 4. I agree. He's that rangy enough of a defender. Not yet, but he will be. I think it's pretty clear he will be to do that. Great. So now he can play the 4. You've established that you view him in that way. Okay, do it. Play him at the 4, right? Like do what you said this guy's appeal is instead of just sitting him on the bench while you play veterans at this 4 spot. And O'Shea Brissett's one of the guys that are playing at the 4, and playing O'Shea is fine. O'Shea is young and good and potentially part of the Pacers' future, but there are other guys, vets, Terry Taylor, that played this weekend that I'm like, no. Give those minutes to Isaiah Jackson. See what you have. He looks special. His ceiling looks like it could be something. They've got to play him every game. I think we're on the same page, but that is my thin thesis of Isaiah Jackson, unless you have more you'd like to add to this discussion.
No, I think that's perfect.
Get him out there, play the rookies, and then I'll do a show at the trade deadline of the Pacers' goals the rest of the season. But that could be part of the whole show. Is hey, if you're younger than 26, you're gonna play every game like that. That seems like an obvious area of growth for the Pacers the rest of the season. Everybody, thank you so much for listening today. Will, where can people follow you and all your NBA musings and opinions?
People can follow me on Twitter at Will Furr NBA, Furr. I am on there sometimes. I take breaks because you've seen this Pacers team. The break is needed.
I'm jealous of breaks sometimes. Back to back on the weekend after I worked a very long week, I was like, oh, man, I would love to have one night of freedom this week, but I still enjoyed it. It was fun. Tomorrow, of course, talking Clippers, talking whatever else happens interesting in that game, and talking about O'Shea Brissett, like I said earlier, because I continue to think he's a little bit of an overlooked part of the Pacers rebuilding plans. And I appreciate you guys making Locked On Pacers your first listen every day. I just want to point out that next Thursday is the trade deadline, which 1, I'll have segments coming up on that. But 2, Locked On Network, we're going to do a live Locked On NBA podcast where hosts from teams making trades can pop in and talk about what's going on. So you got to hop in there. It'll be super fun. And I almost certainly will have to jump in and talk about some Pacers trades that are made on deadline day. So you'll want to stay tuned for that. Thank you all for listening. Hope everybody had a great weekend, and we will be back tomorrow.